Hello! Welcome to another episode of Open Micotomy. Today we're going to be discussing how to find your voice. Stick around. What's up everybody? I'm Matt Lamb with Open Micotomy / Lamb Like the Animal, and today I'm bringing you more comedy tips because it's been a while since I've done that for you. And today I actually got to thinking about something that I talk about, or people will talk about, and never really give you full advice on. So I'm going to give you my best version of how to handle this advice, and that is finding your voice. That is something that you'll hear a lot. People will be like, you need to find your voice in comedy, or how do I find my voice? What is my voice on stage? What does it all mean? More or less, finding your voice means finding that unique thing that when you're on stage, that is the thing that people know you for. That is you sound the same way every time. You're not switching it up too much. You're not too different from the last time you performed. You hit your mark so that when you go on stage, people know more or less what to expect from you. Doing that right away, difficult. You're not gonna find your voice for a while. It's not something that just happens. You don't just go on stage and you're like, oh, that's my voice. I know I sound like this. It takes a while to develop. I technically still didn't even really have mine. I have an idea of where I want to go, and I have an idea of more or less what people expect of me, and I kind of base that around that. So finding your voice isn't just going to come with, a few times. I've been doing comedy for 3 or 4 years, and I still have a rough estimate of what I believe my voice is. There are a few steps you can take to try to figure out what you think your voice might be. One of the first things that helped me determine what my voice was determining what my style of comedy was. My personal style of comedy has a lot more short form, it has a lot more one-liners, it has a lot of small, punchier pieces. Some people like story form, which is a lot longer. It doesn't have quite as many little pieces. There are still jokes within the story, but the story comics tell one long piece. It kind of is thematically related. It's a longer story. I'm moving my hands around a lot. Story comics have 1 or 2 kind of chunks. Smaller short form comics like me, I can bounce around from maybe 4 to 5 topics, whereas a story comic might go from 2 to 3. I'm talking 5-minute chunks. In a longer set, you're gonna obviously have more, but in a 5-minute set, a story comic might hit 1 to 3, and a short form might hit on 4 to 5. That's just, rough estimates here. This is not an exact science. But that's a good way to determine is how many topics are you fitting in? And if you find yourself more toward a story comic, work with that. Work to your strengths. Don't try to immediately be like, oh, well, I want to be this type of comic, so I'm going to try to I'm going to mess up what I've got going for me and do something entirely different. Don't do that. Stick to your strengths if you don't know, obviously. If you have figured things out and you want to switch it up a little bit and you're a little bit more down the line and you're like, well, I like doing this instead, so I need to start working on this piece, sure, do that. But if you're just starting out and you decide, I want to be a short form comic, so I'm going to dedicate myself to this. If that's what you want to do, go for it. But if you are getting stronger reactions from doing stories, stick with that. Which brings me to my next point. Find your cadence, find your rhythm, and by doing that, you need to be paying attention to when and where your laughs are coming in your sets. If you're getting a lot of little laughter throughout your stories, you're probably doing pretty well as a story comic. That's kind of a really good mark to know. When I watch my story comic friends tell their stories, they get a lot of little pieces until the big snap at the end where it all wraps up and it's done. And that's how it goes. And which is great. It's a great way to tell comedy. It keeps people engaged the entire time. You got a lot of little bursts throughout until the big piece at the end. It's a great way to know. And if that's how your set seems to go, you're getting a lot of little pieces and then you get the big one at the end, or, not to say that story comics don't have big laughs throughout the whole thing. It's just, there's a different way to tell jokes when you're telling story comedy. You can't keep pausing for breaks when you have this huge long story to tell. So usually story comics, it's a lot of little pieces and then one big one at the end, and it all ties up. It's a great time. Short form, it's a lot of burst, kind of downtime, burst, kind of some downtime, burst. There's not a lot of little pieces to short form. Short form is a lot of wordplay, a lot of misdirection, a lot of being more clever than being funny, as horrible as that sounds. Being short form has a lot more of cleverness than just outright being funny. It's not contrived, but it's more formulaic. Whereas a story comic, they can make a story that might not be otherwise funny if they didn't punch it up, They can make it funny. They can take something that, they can take a trip to the grocery store and they can make it hilarious. Whereas somebody like me, I have to write out my jokes. I have to be like, this sounds like this, so I'm gonna flip these words and I'm gonna make this weird theme based on two unrelated words that are now suddenly related, and that's the joke. It's very contrived, it's very formulaic, it's not as quote-unquote natural as a story comic, but it's my style, it's what I like to do. So I decided to do that instead of telling story comics, and rather than forcing myself to become a story comic so that I could be well-rounded, I played to my strengths, and that made me a better version of the comedian that I was, rather than being a mediocre version of the comedian that I wanted to be. So if that helps at all, stick to that. And then once you feel comfortable with what you believe is your style, your cadence, your rhythm, which brings me to another point. Pacing and rhythm are not quite the same thing. I think I've mentioned them both earlier in the video. I can't recall for sure, but I wanted to bring them up here. I almost closed out the video before I remembered to bring up this very important point. Pacing and rhythm are similar, but they're not the same thing. They are related, but they are not the same thing. I don't know how many times I need to emphasize this. Pacing is how many jokes you're telling or how many laughs you're getting throughout a thing. As I said before with a story comic, if you're getting, 10 small laughs and then your one big punch in a 5-minute chunk, you're getting 11 laughs in 5 minutes. That's kind of a pacing thing. That's how you know how to count your pace. Laughs per minute is a thing. You don't really need to worry about it too much. If you're doing good, you're doing good. If you're doing bad, you'll know. Don't focus too much on the laughs per minute. Some people really like to harp on the laughs per minutes. I'm not one of those guys. I just like to have a good set. But you still need to kind of pay attention to it. It's kind of a double-edged sword. You don't really need to care, but you do need to pay attention. Because if you're just kind of having weird lulls, people might get bored. People have short attention spans now. We look at things for like 10 seconds before we get bored of them. And you have to kind of adapt as a comedian to know that. You don't need to make a joke every 10 seconds. That's insane. People's attention spans have completely gone away. We don't like to sit around. Pacing needs to be focused on how many laughs you're getting in a certain amount of time. That's your pacing. Your rhythm is different. Your rhythm is where you're hitting hard. That's what a story comic. Their rhythm is, I'm gonna have a kind of a lull and then bang at the end. Short comic is, I'm gonna have one laugh here, one laugh here, one laugh here. That's the rhythm, is finding that little thing and just hitting that mark every time, almost like a musician. Obviously, you can't say, I'm gonna make everyone laugh at every 30 seconds or every 45 seconds. You could probably, you probably can do that. It would not be what I would recommend. It sounds difficult, and I didn't get into comedy because I wanted to work hard. That's not true. I work very hard at my craft. But you need to be paying attention to when your jokes are hitting hardest and how many jokes you're getting off in a certain amount of time. That's the difference between pacing and rhythm. Pacing is how many jokes am I getting, rhythm is when am I hitting hard. I could be totally wrong on that, but that's the way that I interpret it, and that's the way that I kind of hit my jokes. If I'm telling a lot of small jokes, sometimes I'll have little pieces in there that aren't really as good. Sometimes to get to the bigger punchline of a short form, I have to tell a few smaller short forms that don't really hit as hard as what I'm going for. And that's kind of my thing, is sometimes I'll have a little bit of a lull, because if I'm just smashing the cymbals of comedy every time, just bow, 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 that's too much for me. I like to have a little bit of subtlety. Sometimes I'll just tell little pieces along the way to get to that big thing. They're not going to all be related, but they'll eventually get to where I need to go, Story comics is going to start at the beginning of a story, end at the end of the story, obviously. Short form, I might start with the trip to the grocery store, and I might end with getting an Amazon package. That's how unrelated they can be with story comedy, but it's how I tie them together. This kind of got a little bit wound up here at the end. I kind of started talking over myself a little bit, but I just wanted to point out these are the ways that I personally helped myself find my own rhythm. And if these helped you at all, let me know in the comments. Like and subscribe to my channel. Hit that subscription bell ring thing. Do whatever. Ring the bell. Whatever these people are saying now. I hope this helps at all. It was a little wild. It was a little untethered toward the end there, but I do these videos a lot of the time just thinking out loud and thinking about how I like to do it. I take a little bit of notes, then I go for it. That's how I do it. That's how I do comedy. I have bullet points and I try to stick to them, and if it goes off the rails, fuck it. It's how I like to work. I'm Matt with Open Microtomy / Lamb Like the Animal. I hope to see you on stage sometime. Peace.